A chained German shepherd hadn't eaten in days, then one woman risked everything. In the forgotten corners of the world, cruelty often thrives in the shadows. So it was in the small town of Millfield, where a ruthless landlord named Victor Graves ruled through fear and neglect. His dilapidated rental property on the outskirts of town stood as a monument to his heartlessness. Neighbors whispered about the German shepherd that Victor kept chained up in the overgrown backyard, never letting it off the short leash. They'd hear the dog's plaintive whines and spot its emaciated ribs poking through its tanned and black fur. But fear of Victor's wrath and retaliation held their tongues. Victor was not a man to cross. The suffering shepherd, whose name was Rex, had once been a regal and proud creature. Loyal, strong, protective. But months of deprivation and mistreatment had dimmed the light in his brown eyes. Rex had become a hollow husk of the magnificent dog he once was. As he lay in the dusty yard, little more than skin and bones, he dreamed of the warm touch of a kind hand, the simple dignity of a full stomach. But such comforts seem unreachable far away. With each passing day, Rex faded a little more, his hope dwindling like a dying ember. Mia Carter's footsteps crunched on the gravel as she approached the chain-link fence surrounding Victor Graves' property. She peered through the metal lattice, her heart clenching at the sight of the skeletal dog lying listlessly in the patchy grass. As a veterinary technician, Mia had seen her share of animal neglect and abuse. But something about the hollow despair in this shepherd's eyes grabbed her soul and wouldn't let go. She couldn't just walk away, couldn't let this cruelty stand. Mia knew of Victor Graves, of course. Everyone in Millfield did. He was infamous for his coldness, the way he squeezed every dime out of his rundown rental units and the tenants who occupied them. Whispers painted him as merciless, even dangerous to cross. But as she watched a tear leak from the corner of the dog's eye to cut a path through the grime on its muzzle, Mia's resolve hardened into titanium. She would get this dog out. Would get it help. No matter what the cost. "I'll be back for you," she promised in a fierce whisper through the chain links. "Hold on. Please hold on." With one last tormented look at the shepherd, Mia turned and headed back to her car, plans already forming in her racing mind. Victor Graves picked the wrong town to mess with. Millfield was full of good people. They just needed someone to light the spark, to stand up and say enough. Well, Mia would be that spark. That voice. She would rally her neighbors, expose Victor's villainy for all to see. Rex, she now knew the dog was called from his rusted name tag. She would save Rex. Or she would go down in flames trying. Officer James Moreno sat at his desk in Millfield's small police station, wearily rubbing his temples. The report in front of him only added to his building headache and heartache. Mia Carter's meticulously detailed account of animal cruelty at the Graves property on Orchard Lane was damning. Photographic evidence left no room for doubt the German shepherd was in dire straits. Emaciated, chained, defeated. It turned James' stomach. But Victor Graves was no simple animal abuser. James knew all too well how much sway the man held in Millfield. The rental units he owned housed nearly a third of the town's residents. Good people, hard-working people, who lived in fear of rent hikes or eviction if they dared to make a fuss. And now this young vet tech with fire in her eyes expected James to, march over there and arrest Victor Graves. On the word of one woman and a handful of covert photos? James wanted to help the dog, of course he did. But he had to think about the fallout. The unrest it could cause. He sighed heavily, feeling the weight of his badge hanging around his neck. He became a cop to help people, to make his town a better place. But Victor Graves seemed untouchable, above the law. What was he to do? A knock sounded at his office door and he called for the person to enter. The door creaked open to reveal Mia Carter herself, her ponytail swishing with barely restrained energy. "Officer Moreno," she greeted. "I wanted to follow up on the animal abuse report I submitted. That dog needs help. What's our next move?" James met her blazing gaze, seeing both accusation and hope warring there. An idea started to take shape. He couldn't take Graves down alone. But maybe, just maybe, this passionate veterinary tech was the ally he needed. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat, Miss Carter. I believe we have a lot to discuss." The door to Millfield's only bookstore banged open with the force of a strong breeze, announcing the arrival of someone who would not be deterred. Mrs. Alvarez, the shop's proprietress and a retired schoolteacher, saw the resolute figure approaching and straightened her shawl with a knowing smile. Young Mia Carter strode down the aisle, green eyes alight with purpose. She'd been a regular at Wise Words bookstore since she was a slip of a thing, snapping up books on animals and veterinary medicine. Always polite, always leaving the books in better condition than she found them. A good head and a better heart. "Mrs. Alvarez, I need your help," Mia announced with no preamble. "It's about the dog at Victor Graves' property. Rex. He's desperate, starving. I can't let it stand." Mrs. Alvarez did not let her surprise show on her weathered face. Few in Millfield dared to speak against Victor Graves. Fewer still were brave enough to come to her. She understood why. Decades ago, Mrs. Alvarez had stood up to Victor, back when he was an arrogant young man determined to buy up depressed properties after the mill closed. She'd rallied her fellow teachers to fight back when he tried to gut funding for the town's only elementary school. It had been an ugly, protracted battle. One that left scars. And cemented Victor Graves' reputation as a bully who would stop at nothing. Mrs. Alvarez walked slowly out from behind the counter, her hands clasped. She studied Mia for a long, measuring moment. The young woman met her gaze without flinching, chin lifted, posture resolute. "And what would you have me do, Miss Carter?" the retired teacher asked softly. "I am an old woman now. My fighting days are behind me." "I need your wisdom," Mia replied, undeterred. "I need the benefit of your experience. Victor Graves may be powerful, but he's only one man. If this town stands together, if we expose the truth, he can't stand against all of us. I've already spoken to Officer Moreno. But I need your guidance." Mrs. Alvarez closed her eyes briefly, remembering the feel of a picket sign in her hands, the rush of risking everything for what was right. When she looked at Mia again, a slow smile curved her mouth. "Well then, I believe this calls for some tea. And strategy. Come to the back room, dear. Let's see what trouble we can stir up for the cause of good." With a conspiratorial wink, she led the way to her back office. Oh yes. Victor Graves was about to remember that Millfield still had claws. And the shepherd's fiercest defenders were on the prowl. Mia paced the small back room of Wise Words bookstore, adrenaline pumping through her veins with every step. She told Mrs. Alvarez and Officer Moreno everything, the ribs poking through Rex's fur, the despair dulling his eyes, the heavy chain that kept him tethered and deprived. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes sparked with anger, but Officer Moreno rubbed his chin, pensive. "Animal control won't act without police backup," Mia explained, words tumbling out in an urgent stream. "And the police need probable cause to get on that property, right? So it's a stalemate. Meanwhile, Rex wastes away and Victor Graves continues terrorizing this town." Officer Moreno held up a calming hand. "I hear you, Miss Carter. But we have to be smart about this. Graves has a lot of vulnerable people under his thumb. If we go in guns blazing, he could retaliate against his tenants. Raise rents, refuse repairs, evict people. We can't risk that." Mia wanted to scream in frustration, but she knew he was right. They had to think of the whole community, not just Rex. But surely there had to be a way to save both. What if? Mrs. Alvarez spoke up, her voice soft but steely. "We made this about more than the dog? Used Rex's plight to shine a light on all of Victor's abuses? Get the tenants on our side, have them document everything, and build an airtight case?" Mia stared at her, a slow smile starting to dawn. "Organize the community. Show them that they're stronger together than they are apart. If Victor retaliates, we rally around the person he targets." Officer Moreno nodded slowly. "Strength in numbers. and in meticulous documentation. If we can prove a pattern of negligence and intimidation, then we can take him down, Mia finished, her heart starting to race with the thrill of a plan coming together. We start with Rex. But we don't end there. We keep going until everyone Victor Graves has bullied is free of him. She looked from Mrs. Alvarez's knowing eyes to Officer Moreno's resolute face. The first threads of a community coalition with the suffering shepherd at its heart. Hold on, Rex, she thought fiercely. We're coming. Millfield was about to remember its strength, with the wise, the brave, and the compassionate leading the charge. Victor Graves, you messed with the wrong town. And the wrong dog. Mia knocked on yet another door in the rundown apartment complex owned by Victor Graves, her hand cramping from the dozens of flyers she'd handed out. She'd lost track of how long she'd been canvassing Graves' rental properties, talking to tenants, documenting their stories. A middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes cracked the door open, her face wary. Can I help you? Mia summoned her warmest smile, holding up a flyer emblazoned with Rex's gaunt face and the newly formed Millfield Tenants Association logo. My name is Mia. I'm with the MTA, a community group dedicated to advocating for tenants' rights and humane pet ownership. Would you be willing to share your experiences renting from Victor Graves? The wariness didn't leave the woman's face. I don't want any trouble. Mr. Graves doesn't like us talking about him. Mia's heart clenched at the fear she saw. This was what Victor counted on, cowing people into silence. But she wouldn't let it stand. I understand, she soothed. But you don't have to face this alone anymore. There's a whole group of us gathering evidence of neglected repairs, unfair rent hikes, all of Graves' abuses. If we stand together. A spark of hope flickered in the woman's eyes. You're the one trying to help that poor dog, aren't you? The shepherd? Mia nodded. His name is Rex. And helping him is just the start. We want to help all of you, too. The tenant bit her lip, seeming to wrestle with herself. Then, all at once, she opened the door wider. Come in, she whispered. I have receipts. Photos. Emails asking for repairs that never got a response. And I'm not the only one. Relief and gratitude flooded Mia as she crossed the threshold. Another voice added to the chorus, another brick in the case against Victor Graves. Hold on, Rex, she thought as she took out her notepad, ready to listen and record. Your suffering sparked a movement. This town won't rest until you, and everyone Graves has bullied, are safe. Change was coming to Millfield. And it started with a starving dog and the woman determined to save him. Officer James Moreno stared at the thick binder on his desk, barely daring to breathe. Mia Carter sat across from him, her green eyes shining with triumph and barely suppressed emotion. It's all there, she said quietly. Every scrap of evidence the MTA has gathered. Testimonials from over 24 tenants. Documentation of black mold, leaking pipes, exposed wiring. Rent receipts showing arbitrary increases. Emails and texts from Victor Graves threatening tenants with eviction if they complained. James reverently opened the binder, his eyes widening at the meticulously organized and labeled sections. He'd never seen a case file so thoroughly put together by civilians. Miss Carter, this is... He shook his head, momentarily at a loss for words. This is incredible. With this, we can get a warrant. We can get animal control, code enforcement, everyone on that property. Nail Graves on everything from animal abuse to illegal evictions. Tears glimmered in Mia's eyes, but her voice was steady. I promised Rex I'd come back for him. That I'd stop at nothing. This town has been intimidated into silence for far too long. The floodgates have opened. People are ready to stand up and fight back. James met her gaze, a lump growing in his throat. He became a cop to help people, to protect the vulnerable and hold wrongdoers accountable. Millfield had lost sight of that, cowed too long by a petty tyrant. But no more. He stood, extending his hand to Mia. When she took it, he shook it firmly, sealing a pact. Miss Carter, the Millfield Police Department is ready to fulfill its duty. With this evidence, Victor Graves' reign of terror is over. I'll get the warrant. You gather the community. It's time for Rex, and this whole town, to know justice. Mia squeezed his hand, her smile tremulous but victorious. Then she raised her chin, spearing him with a look that was pure steel. Officer Moreno, let's go get our dog. He nodded sharply. The people of Millfield had found their voice. They had released their fear and embraced their strength. Today, the community stood united. And God help Victor Graves, because justice was finally coming for him. Victor Graves paced the decaying living room of the once grand house at the center of his rental empire, his hands clenching and unclenching with fury. Muffled sounds of unrest filtered through the grimy windows, car doors slamming, voices raised in anger and determination. Nosy tenants. Uppity activists. Who did they think they were, holding meetings, making demands, threatening to expose him? He'd kept this miserable town under his boot heel for decades. He'd do whatever it took to keep them there. He stalked over to the window, twitching back the tattered curtain with one gnarled finger. What he saw made his already thunderous scowl darken into something truly ugly. A crowd was gathering on what passed for a lawn, a few key figures standing examining something just beyond his fence. The skinny blonde with the self-righteous face and the Millfield Tenants Association logo on her shirt, she had to be the ringleader. And was that a cop with her? Oh, they'd regret this. He'd make them pay dearly for daring to challenge him. Graves dropped the curtain and snatched his cell phone off the stained coffee table. Time to remind everyone what happened when you crossed Victor Graves. His property manager picked up on the first ring. Tony, Graves spat, get to Orchard Lane. I want eviction notices on the door of every bleeding heart who's out there on the sidewalk. And get the padlocks ready. Anyone who can't pay a 20% rent hike by 5 p.m. gets locked out. Boss, are you sure? Dash. Did I stutter? Graves roared. Bleed them dry and toss them on the street. And Tony? If anyone even looks at that mangy mutt out back, shoot it dead. Let's see how the little blonde bitch likes her precious cause when it's laid out in a body bag. He ended the call with a vicious jab. His hands were shaking, his breath wheezing in his lungs. How dare they? How dare they? They had no idea what was coming. He'd raze this whole rotting town to the ground before he let them win. And he'd start with the shepherd and the bitch who thought she could save it. Moreno at the chain-link fence surrounding Victor Graves' dilapidated property, her heart pounding against her ribs. The binder of evidence was clutched in Moreno's hands, the paper warrant crinkled from his tight grip. This was it. The moment of truth. Behind them, a crowd of Millfield residents had gathered, tenants Mia had collaborated with, merchants who had donated food and supplies, neighbors who had finally found the courage to take a stand. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, an atmosphere of nervous anticipation rippling through the crowd. Mia's eyes were locked on Rex, lying still as death in the patchy grass just beyond the fence. Was he still breathing? Were they too late? Please, she prayed, let him have held on just a little longer. Miss Carter. Officer Moreno's voice snapped her out of her spiraling thoughts. He was looking at her with a mixture of concern and determination. Are you ready? Mia swallowed hard, then nodded. She reached out to lay one hand on the chain link, as if she could send Rex strength through the metal. I'm ready. For Rex. For all of us. Moreno signaled to the waiting animal control officers and building code inspectors. Then, with a deep breath, he unlatched the gate and stepped onto Victor Graves' property. Victor Graves. Moreno called in a voice that rang with authority. This is the Millfield Police Department. We have a warrant to search this property for signs of animal neglect and code violations. Come out with your hands visible. A beat of silence. 2. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. Then the front door banged open and there he was. Victor Graves, face mottled with rage, one shaking finger pointing at the assembly. "How dare you," he screamed. "This is private property. You have no right. I'll have all your jobs. I'll bury you in lawsuits." But Moreno held up the warrant, his face impassive. "We have every right, Mr. Graves. Please step aside." As Graves sputtered and fumed, seemingly on the verge of an apoplectic fit, Mia slipped past Moreno and sprinted for the backyard. She skidded to a halt in front of Rex's prone form, tears already blurring her vision. "Rex," she whispered, dropping to her knees. "I'm here, boy. I came back, just like I promised. You're safe now. I swear it. Please be alive. Please." She held her breath, one trembling hand reaching out to touch the dirty fur. A second passed. 2. Then, miraculously, the shepherd's chest rose and fell in a shallow breath. A tiny whine escaped his throat and his tail gave a single, tentative thump against the ground. A sob tore out of Mia's chest. Tears poured down her face as she stroked Rex's head. "That's it, sweetheart. You're the bravest, best dog. Help is coming. We're going to get you out of here. Victor Graves will never hurt you again." In that moment, with her hand buried in Rex's fur and Moreno reading Graves' rights in the background, everything narrowed down to this battered creature who had never stopped fighting. Rex had held on, never giving up hope. And now, neither would Mia. Neither would Millfield. The crowd of Millfield residents parted like a silent sea as Officer Moreno led a sputtering, handcuffed Victor Graves out of the once feared property on Orchard Lane. Camera phones were held aloft, recording the downfall of the man who had loomed like a shadow over the town for years. Graves' eyes darted wildly, shock and disbelief warring with impotent rage on his mottled face. "You can't do this," he shouted, straining against the cuffs. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy all of you." But his words fell on deaf ears. The crowd stared back, united and unafraid. No more cowering. No more letting fear control them. They had reclaimed their courage, and in doing so, reclaimed their town. In the backyard, Mia crouched by Rex's side as the animal control team moved in with gentle hands and soft words. They eased a muzzle over his snout, just a precaution for a large dog in pain, and slid a thick blanket beneath his emaciated body. Mia's heart twisted with each whimper Rex made as they transferred him to a stretcher, but she never stopped stroking his fur, murmuring encouragement and love. "You're going to be okay," she promised as they carried him out, past the silent crowd and the flashing lights of the waiting animal ambulance. "We'll get some food in you, a soft bed, and so much love. You'll never be chained or hungry again, Rex. You're free now. We all are." As the ambulance doors closed, Mia finally let herself crumple, the enormity of it all crashing over her in a wave. They had done it. They had looked cruelty and greed in the eye and said no more. She felt an arm come around her shoulders and looked up to see Mrs. Alvarez smiling at her through her own tears. "You did it, Mija," the older woman murmured. "You woke this town up. You saved that dog, and so many others in the process." Mia leaned into the embrace, tears tracking down her face. "We did it," she whispered fiercely. "All of us. Together." She looked out over the crowd, meeting the shining eyes of people she now counted as friends and allies. "Millfield is strong, right?" A chorus of cheers went up, fists pumping the air. In the jubilant chaos, Officer Moreno caught Mia's eye over the roof of his squad car, a small smile playing on his lips as he nodded to her. She nodded back, understanding passing between them. Victor Graves was finished. Brought down by the courage of one woman and one dog, and the town who rallied behind them. There would be a long road ahead, new management for the properties, repairs and upgrades to be made, programs to implement to make sure no one could accumulate that much power again. But for now, Millfield would celebrate. Would breathe the sweet air of freedom and revel in the power of unity. And at the center of it all was a scrawny shepherd who had no idea he was a hero. That his suffering had touched the heart of a town and sparked a revolution. Rex would heal, would learn the touch of gentle hands and the fullness of food in his belly. And Millfield would heal with him. One day, one kindness, one act of courage at a time. The weeks following Victor Graves' arrest passed in a blur of activity and emotions for Mia. Between her shifts at the vet clinic, she spent every spare minute at the animal hospital with Rex, coaxing him through his recovery. It was slow going at first. Years of abuse and neglect had left more than just physical scars. Rex flinched at sudden movements, shied away from loud voices. But Mia was endlessly patient, sitting with him for hours, hand-feeding him tiny morsels, showing him with every soft touch that he was cherished. Slowly, wonderfully, Rex began to heal. The sparkle returned to his eye, his coat regained its luster. His tail, once listless, now thumped in genuine joy at the sight of Mia. The day he placed his muzzle trustingly in her palm, eyes soft with affection, Mia wept tears of pure happiness. "That's it, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking his velvet ears. "You're safe now. You're so loved. And I'll make sure you have the most wonderful forever home. I promise." Even as she said it, a small, wistful part of her wished she could be that forever home. But her rental didn't allow big dogs, and with her student loans, buying a house was a far-off dream. No, she would have to be content loving Rex until the perfect family came along. It was enough, more than enough, to know he was safe and cherished. As Rex grew stronger, so too did the spirit of Millfield. Officer Moreno, true to his word, had spearheaded a complete overhaul of Victor Graves' rental empire. Absentee landlords were out, local property management, with a focus on safety and fairness, was in. Tenants formed associations, advocating for each other and holding elected officials accountable. Mia couldn't walk down Main Street without being stopped by someone eager to share a story of positive change or press a baked good into her hands in thanks. The shepherd of Millfield, they called Rex, a living symbol of the town's resilience and unity. "You should be proud, Mija," Mrs. Alvarez said one day as they watched Rex take his first tentative Lopez around the dog park, savoring his newfound freedom. "Look what you started. Look at the hope you've given us." Mia ducked her head, cheeks flushing. "I didn't do anything special. I just couldn't stand by. Couldn't stay silent. Rex deserved better. We all did." Mrs. Alvarez turned to her, dark eyes shining with wisdom and love. "And that, my dear, is the very definition of special. Of extraordinary. An ordinary person, choosing to act with compassion. That's how the world changes. One brave soul at a time." Mia swallowed against the sudden lump in her throat. She thought of all the people who had rallied around Rex, who had shared their stories and joined their voices to hers. The potential in every kind heart, every helping hand. As if sensing her emotions, Rex trotted over, bypassing his favorite red ball to nose at her fingers. Mia sank to her knees, burying her face in his soft ruff as he leaned into her embrace. "You saved me too, you know that," she whispered into his fur. "Showed me what I'm capable of. What we're all capable of when we stand together." Rex licked her cheek, tail wagging in joyful agreement. And in that perfect, shining moment, Mia knew that whatever the future held, for her and for Rex, they would face it as they had learned to face everything, with courage, compassion, and the knowledge that they were never, ever alone. The final chapter of Rex's journey in Millfield began, appropriately enough, in Mrs. Alvarez's bookshop. Mia was curled in an overstuffed armchair, Rex dozing at her feet, when the bell over the door jingled merrily. She looked up, smiling, expecting to see Mrs. Alvarez returning from her tea run. Instead, her heart gave a little flutter at the sight of James Moreno standing in the doorway, cap in hand, looking oddly nervous. "Officer Moreno," she said warmly, marking her place in her book and rising. "What a pleasant surprise. Is everything okay?" A bit of the old worry crept in. Even with Victor Graves safely behind bars, Mia still found herself tensing at unexpected visits from authority figures. "Everything's fine," James assured quickly, seeing the flicker of concern in her eyes. "Better than fine, actually. I have some news. About Rex. At the sound of his name, Rex's head popped up, ears pricked. He trotted over to Officer Moreno, tail wagging in greeting. Mia watched, heart melting, as the usually stoic policeman crouched down to ruffle Rex's ears, receiving a face full of happy licks in return. "Hey there, buddy," James chuckled. "Yeah, I'm happy to see you too. You're looking good. Real good." He glanced up at Mia, something unreadable in his eyes. "Walk with me?" Puzzled but intrigued, Mia clipped Rex's leash on and followed James out into the warm sunshine. They walked in companionable silence for a block, Rex's toenails clicking merrily on the sidewalk. Finally, James cleared his throat. "So, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the future. About what I want." He stopped, turning to face Mia. "I've watched you these past weeks. The way you fought for Rex, for this town. The way you've poured your heart into his recovery. And it's made me realize I want to be a part of that. A part of his life. And yours. If you'll have me." Mia stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. Was he saying? James rushed on, words tumbling out in a nervous flood. "I talked to my landlord. He's agreed to let me have a dog. A big one. And I've already spoken to the vet, got everything set up for his transfer. I want to adopt Rex, Mia. Want to give him the forever home he deserves. And I hope, that you'll be a part of that home too." Tears sprang to Mia's eyes. She looked down at Rex, who was leaning against James' leg, gazing up at him adoringly. Her two heroes, who had saved each other in so many ways. "Officer Moreno," she managed, voice choked with emotion. "James. There is nothing, I want more." The smile that broke over James' face could have outshone the sun. He reached out, taking Mia's hand in his. On her other side, Rex pressed close, tail thumping against her legs in a matching cadence. There, on a sunlit sidewalk in the heart of the town they loved, their little family stood hand in hand, paw in paw. And as the breeze ruffled Rex's fur, carrying with it the scent of fresh starts and shining futures, Mia knew down to her very soul. This was just the beginning. For her, for James, for Rex. For Millfield. The start of a brave new chapter, written not in fear, but in hope, compassion, and the unshakable power of love. In the years that followed, Mia would often look back on that golden afternoon and marvel at the way one courageous act could ripple out, changing countless lives for the better. Her fight for Rex, and the way Millfield had rallied around them, had set the town on a path of transformation that continued to unfold in big ways and small. The rental units once ruled by Victor Graves now stood as models of safe, affordable housing, each one a testament to the power of community care. The Tenants Association had blossomed into a vibrant hub of advocacy and support, with Mrs. Alvarez's bookshop serving as an unofficial headquarters. There, residents gathered to swap stories, share resources, and organize for positive change. And at the center of it all, a constant reminder of how far they'd come, was Millfield's most beloved canine citizen. Rex had settled into his new life with James with a joy and ease that made Mia's heart soar. Where once there had been a broken, emaciated creature, there now stood a magnificent dog in the fullness of health, his coat glossy, his eyes bright. He became a fixture around town, trotting proudly at James' side on patrols, playing gentle ambassador to school children and seniors alike. His presence was a living, breathing symbol of Millfield's triumph over cruelty, and the enduring strength of its compassion. And oh, how that compassion continued to grow, tended with loving hands by Mia and her friends. The Millfield Humane Society, once a cramped and struggling entity, now thrived under Mia's leadership, with a gleaming new facility and an army of dedicated volunteers. No animal would ever again suffer within the town limits, not while Mia Carter and her team had breath in their bodies. But perhaps the most profound change was the one that happened quietly, gradually, in the heart of the town itself. It was there in the way neighbors greeted each other with genuine warmth, in the community gardens that sprung up on once vacant lots. It was in the way civic meetings became not just forums for complaints, but for celebration, innovation, collaboration. Millfield had learned, through hardship and triumph, the true meaning of resilience. Had discovered that its greatest strength lay not in any one leader, but in the collective power of its kindness. In the understanding that by lifting up the most vulnerable among them, be they human or animal, they elevated the entire community. It was a lesson that Mia and James carried with them as they built their life together, Rex a cherished member of their little family. And on warm summer evenings, as they walked hand in hand through the vibrant, welcoming streets of their hometown, Mia would often pause, overcome with gratitude for all that had grown from one small, brave seed of compassion. Rex would look up at her in those moments, his eyes shining with a love that never failed to take her breath away. And in the echo of his heartbeat against her palm, Mia heard the promise that had carried them through the darkest of times, the vow that had lit the way to a brighter dawn. Hold on. I'm here. We're in this together. Always. The sun dipped low over Millfield Town Square, painting the scene in rich, honey-gold light. The air was filled with the happy chatter of friends and neighbors, the clink of glasses, the warm aroma of barbecue smoke. It was the annual Millfield Summer Festival, and the whole town had turned out to celebrate. Mia stood at the edge of the crowd, James' arm around her waist, taking it all in with a heart so full she thought it might burst. There was Mrs. Alvarez, presiding over the pie baking contest with a twinkle in her eye. Officer Moreno, off-duty and grinning as he manned the grill. The Millfield Tenants Association, running a booth to register new voters. Everywhere she looked, she saw the fruits of the seeds they had planted, the community they had fought so hard to nurture. And weaving through it all, accepting ear scritches and hot dog snippets with equal enthusiasm, was the dog who had started it all. Rex, muzzle gone gray but eyes still bright, tail wagging with undiminished vigor. The shepherd of Millfield, forever a symbol of the town's courage and resilience. As if sensing her gaze, Rex trotted over, leaning into Mia's legs with a contented sigh. She crouched down, burying her face in his thick ruff, inhaling the familiar scent of home and unconditional love. "We did good, didn't we, buddy?" she murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Look at what we made. Look at what this town became." James crouched beside her, one hand resting on Rex's back, the other finding Mia's, their fingers interlacing. "You did good," he said softly. "You saw an injustice, and you didn't look away. You stood up, even when it was hard. Even when it was scary. And you inspired the rest of us to stand with you." Mia leaned into him, head on his shoulder. "We all did it. Together. That's the magic of this place, the magic you helped me find. When we take care of each other, when we believe in each other, there's nothing we can't do." As if in agreement, Rex let out a soft woof, tail thumping against the ground. Mia laughed, scratching behind his ears in the way she knew he loved. Her brave boy, her partner in hope. The reason she woke up every morning determined to make the world a little bit better. The last of the sun slipped below the horizon, and the square came alive with the glow of string lights, the flicker of fireflies. Music drifted on the warm breeze, and Mia let James pull her to her feet, let him lead her in a slow dance right there on the grass. Rex circled them, a furry sentinel of joy, as the stars winked into existence overhead. And as Mia swayed in the arms of the man she loved, in the town she cherished, with the dog who had taught her the true meaning of courage pressed close, she knew, with a certainty that hummed in her very bones, that this was what happiness looked like. This was what victory felt like. Not just a rescued dog or a vanquished villain, but a community forever changed. A place where compassion had taken root, where hope had blossomed, where love had proven itself stronger than fear. Millfield. Her home. Her heart. And as the music played on and the lights twinkled above, Mia closed her eyes and breathed in the sweet, incandescent truth of it. There was no darkness too deep, no sorrow too profound, for the light of kindness to transform. No dream too big, for a brave soul to make real. Because in the end, in the brilliant, boundless landscape of the possible, love was always, always enough.